Good evening, everybody. This is Tank, and today is January 20th, and we have brought Mrs. Possible, who we affectionately refer to as Kim Possible, onto the call. That is not a real name, in case you're trying to look it up. I called to check if the timing was okay, and then Jarrett Rand called, and we ended up in a very engaging conversation for 4 hours. So, Kim, you want to say hi to everybody?
Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where everyone is.
All right. So, obviously, for anybody who doesn't know, Kim has kind of emerged to give us some insights into the process and what the holdups to the process are. And we are doing our best to bring forth this event so that the whole world can get liquidity. So, Kim, we have a bunch of questions that people submitted, and I guess I'm going to start it off with you. So, Kim, this makes the most sense to start with. Could you kind of tell people a little bit about how you got into this position as much as you can?
Well, first of all, I did not apply for this job, and I did not ask for this job. When I found out I had a job, I was actually traveling. I was outside the country, had been outside the country for about time. And I was working on a action, probably this would have been about 2010, 2011, end of 2010, beginning of 2011. And at that time, remember the market crashed in 2008, and the country in some serious financial situation. And I had some gold that I was intending to bring to the country, and at that time, I could go to the Treasury Department, and nobody showed up. So I spent about 3 months in negotiations with everyone from UBS to JP Morgan to HSBC. There were some people that showed up, and after a few months of negotiations, everybody was splitting trillions of dollars, and everything was shut down. My predecessor showed up and made a deal with the government to the location that I was in at that time. But I was also informed at that time that I'd be taking that position. Position was a probationary at that point. It was 2011 in March, and I didn't. The position did not go firm until my 40th birthday, which would have been in September of 2012. They told me at the time that I had to wait until at least the 15th of June 15th, 2011 to release any funds, because that is when the agreement expired with the Federal Reserve and Trust. So at the time, I was only beginning to learn about the shadow side of the banking system. I was just trying to do something good for my country at the time.
So you get thrust into this position, and you're being kind of trained in the probationary period. And from that time to the time that you took over full-time. Now, when you finally take the position full-time, what do your duties kind of entail? I mean, as far as what is your goal and what do you have to accomplish with this position?
Well, fortunately, it wasn't actually like an appointment. So I didn't have, like a job application that kind of gave me a description of what it is or what I'm not supposed to do. I had a lot of people trying to tell me what to do for a long time. And it wasn't until probably the beginning of 2015 when I gained full access to the system myself without any intercessors, and to figure out what the actual instructions were in the trust, and that it wasn't anything anybody was telling me, that was for sure, and how the former managers, trustees, or custodians of the trust had failed the system. So it's been a learning process for me, but it wasn't actually like a school or a training. It was more of being schooled constantly by the other side. Does that answer your question?
Yes, you cut out there for a second, but that definitely answers my question. I think we got it.
I apologize, and so I will move. Try to get to a better location for you.
No problem. Okay. So Kim, you have the codes and ultimately the responsibility. So to kind of make the world liquid and kind of restore humanity, in a sense, at least financially. Is that fair to say?
The system has many different facets. The financial aspect of the system is only one part of it. Converting it so that it wasn't doing a lot of the things that it was doing before, to have a lot of the capabilities it had before, is a whole other side of it. But yes, that's part of my job, yes.
Okay, so one of the questions that comes up is, so do you have the ability to make the RV go for the people so it's actually fully liquid at this point? And if so, if you have that ability, maybe you could just talk a little bit about what the holdups are at this time.
Well, evaluating currencies of the planet has to happen in a stable manner. Sorry, I had to move outside to get a better signal. So it's not as easy as everybody might think. Then, of course, we've had issues with, overprinting of new currencies. Of course, the cabal got their hands on it. Sorry, Tank.
Okay.
My neighbor's dogs are communicating. So we've had an issue with overprints, duplicate printing. A lot of people that hold these currencies are having, there's multiple copies out there. Of course, the cabal, I guess as you would call it, got their hands on one of the printing presses and, printed stacks and stacks and stacks of dinar, and there's just not a supply chain and a base to support that kind of an inflow into the world. So that's part of it. And part of our 4-hour-long conversation with Mr. Rand last night actually talked about how to release so much liquidity into the system all at one time, either on a weekly basis or every few-day basis, where we're not going to crash. So I think we've come up with a pretty fair methodology, which has now been presented, and we're waiting on an answer. Most importantly, right now we have obviously a government shutdown here in the States that everybody's been working on today.
Well, that's good to know that people are working on it. So with that in mind, okay, so based on what you're saying, and these are the big claims that people really are having a hard time believing are true. We constantly hear things from Reno. We constantly hear, they were exchanged in Reno, and we hear that some people are liquid, and we hear these things all the time. And I know that you've talked a little bit about kind of the mirrored accounts in the banking system. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
There is a group. I missed one of the systems. It was the Babylon system, and that system there, I don't know who exactly created it, but I know that it had been taken over by the other, and they used it to try to hack the old system, the quantum system. And they were unsuccessful. And then Babylon 2 came, Babylon 3, Babylon 4, Babylon 5, and now we're into the black screen, and then we were into Hercules. But what these systems do, it's like a large server, and that one server mirrors out, they put what we call, in electronic terms, jargon, I guess they call it like pins. And they put pins in these particular banks, which means it's a direct connection between that server and the bank. And then it shows there are large numbers of funds and liquidity in these institutions, but they don't have any kind of allocation number in the currency which they're mirroring, and they don't have an asset base, don't have a production line to support those numbers. That's why everybody's saying, well, we need the Treasury Department to prove it, because they need an allocation number of the state's currency, and they know that since 2012, the Federal Reserve cannot issue a new allocation of USD. It has to come from the Treasury Department. So there's a little bit of in the Reserve and the Treasury, there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, because the Reserve doesn't acknowledge the fact that the contract expired, and the Treasury is being, half the Treasury is being left in the dark. So the ones at the Treasury that know will always take the calls from, what you call the cabal. And the cabal will say, well, you just wait, sit down and wait, and, there's no asset base. There's no allocation number. The government doesn't have assets at this moment in time to issue such a large magnitude of currency.
Gotcha.
So there's kind of a standoff going on where, some of these activities that happened for the last 100 years, you have to remember, were all at above government or above presidential clearance level. So there really hasn't been, the money just always came.
Right.
Nobody knows what. So it's a learning process also for the government, just like it is for all of you.
So could you just talk about that a little bit while you're there? Kind of the world structure, because I think that's an important piece, because a lot of times in this process, we get such limited information on this level. I don't know. I mean, I'm certain that most of us really don't appreciate where the control mechanisms go and how far down the line we are. And I know your goal, you said, is to give the money to the government, and also give the money to the people. That's the goal. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You mean how the structure used to be?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Organization, has been maintained on the internet. The Illuminati and on the, you hear about the deep state, and what they used to always call it was the order. So in the structure of the order for 1,000 years, we had 3 parties at the top, a father and 2 sons, and you had 21 parents, and then you had, I think there was probably about a coven, at least 2 covens underneath them. And then underneath them you had family masters. And then underneath the family masters, then you start getting into these banking families, or the 13 bloodlines, or whatnot, that far down the food chain. And then underneath them, you had your groups like your, Nazi group, or the Antifa, and you had groups like the Jesuits, and the Vatican, the Templars, and everybody these people. And then underneath them, then you start getting to the government.
So it would be a big jump. So now this is the order as it used to be constituted. And currently we've been hearing that these forces have been being taken out and then at least attempting to be eliminated on some level, at least to a certain degree. And if I understand correctly, your goal is to really jump over all of the levels above the government and be able to successfully transact this disbursement of funds to the people, or to the governments and to the people. Is that accurate?
There are some members of these groups, especially as it relates to the lower end, have turned the corner and have realized that what we're doing is the right thing. But when you get as far as the higher levels of the organization, I spent years trying to talk to people, and there's no reason behind it. There's no rhyme, there's no reason, there was no training, and perhaps that was actually done on purpose. They don't understand how economics works for the most part. They only understand power and control, and that they want it. So yes, at this point in time, that is why no codes are being given to those people. And the only way that I think the planet can actually turn around is if the government step up and together directly and receive their own codes. Also humanity needs to receive their own codes. So unfortunately, there's not a lot the average everyday person can do. When you walk into the bank with one of your codes, they're going to push you out the banks, because the top personnel there are all pretty much controlled by the order. So it's been a battle between myself and all the people in between to get to all of you and to the government.
Yeah. Now,
you and I have even experienced the same thing. When we first started talking.
Yep, I was going to say that. Go ahead.
She's the wrong side. Don't talk to her. Run away and all of this stuff. And then now everybody's seeing the truth.
Right. And and just to witness to what she's saying, and I do understand how unnerving this can be, right? But if you look at what we've wanted in this process all along, we wanted someone to give us proof and give us evidence and to give us results. Now, the best I can tell, what we've gotten from everybody else is false reports and promises that have not yet been kept. Now, as far as I know, real liquidity is not realized anywhere where somebody's actually able to buy, even though people have money, it looks like, in their account that Kim just explained. They can't use this. And we had another experience the other day. And Kim, could you talk about this? What the goal was with the gentleman from that we gave the code to the other day?
The core group?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. This gentleman from the core group of the Admirals group, Tank had arranged a call between himself and myself. He used the title of Colonel when we first talked, and he told me that he had an account that he could see at the bank, and he's personally seen it with his own eyes for $155 million, and he couldn't touch it. So I said, okay, I can give you a code that will release those funds. Now, let me explain codes to you, okay? Because there might be a misunderstanding, because the term codes runs around the like crazy. So the trust has a pretty substantial off-ledger account at Wells Fargo Bank, okay? It's been there since the bank was originally founded, and it was originally in New York and then moved to San Francisco later. The account has both cash and gold in it, and is accessible and by opening coin. So the off-ledger system was turned off by me in 2014, so the banks couldn't even see their back accounts anymore. They used to be able to see them, but they couldn't touch them. And that's where the codes come in. So the permission, the screen is granted by me, and then they go through the screens and they can see origin of fund, history of fund, and the allocation that corresponds with the currency that is in that account. So that is on the third screen. Then they go to the fifth screen, and then they put in the receiving account, and then they put in the code, because it asks for a drawing code, and then it asks for a clearance. And then I also have that code as well, which allows the transfer of that currency. The code that I have as it relates to United States dollars, because that's what I think your predominant listener base here is in the United States. So is cleared already through Homeland Security and through OFAC, which is Office of Foreign Asset Control in the Treasury Department. So I gave him the information of the account. I gave him the $55 million, because it's not a large amount, so it doesn't need to be balanced out with an asset, on the promise that it would help the veterans and also create change. And he agreed. So towards the end of the call, he informs me he's not really a colonel. So I said, okay. And he said that's just a name that they gave him within the group. And I said, okay. And so he said he was going to go down to Wells Fargo and use the codes. The next morning, he informs us that a friend of his is going to be made liquid that day. So he didn't want to go to the bank. And then when it wasn't liquid, then he came back to us and said that the core group called him and said that he would be liquid by Monday. And so he decided he didn't want to put himself out there with the bank and take the code to the bank. So, and I apologize for my post this morning seeming a little bit frustrated. That was part of the source of my frustration, is that, I'm trying to help us. I'm trying to at least get some liquidity into the groups. There's a lot of people I see that post. So it shouldn't be that way. So if nothing else, we could get these people at least a little bit of peace while we're working on the whole process. And that was the whole pretense behind trying to get someone who has an account that's not liquid a code so that they could actually make that account liquid. And we could all of you could get what it is you need. At least need, try to hit some basic needs of all the people. So that we hoped. I also gave a code to Tank here for a certain amount. It's a small amount. It's not nearly as large as the other. But you that and he's really hard.
Kim, you're breaking up. I think we may have lost Kim. All right, folks. Currently, we just called Kim, and she was cut off. I do want to finish her story for you, just to be clear. The gentleman, the colonel, ended up trying to use that code, but by that time, I had told her of the alternate process the gentleman was going to go through, and she canceled the code. So the reason why that code did not work is because Kim ended up canceling it, because she's very, very careful not to allow this money to be in the wrong hands. And not that the colonel was in the wrong hands, but to make sure that, no one else was aware of it. So as soon as that started to go through and it was blocked, that's what happened. Oh, there we go. Yes. 1 second. Okay, Kim, you there?
I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. All right, we're back in business.
Awesome. Welcome back.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
Apparently I said something that somebody didn't want me to say because I could hear you. I don't know. My phone wasn't, you couldn't hear me.
Kim, the one thing I said, just to verify, because I think people want to make sure it's accurate from you, just that that there was an alternate method that I mentioned to you that the colonel had said he would try, and that when I told you that, you canceled those codes, right? Because you wanted it done in a very specific way.
Well, I told him on our initial call that the codes were to be brought to the bank, and if there was an issue with me and your lawyer, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And,
I do.
And they were to go nowhere else unless he called me. And he decided that he was going to send them to, I said, they're not to go to the Admiral, they're not to go to anyone else, they're to go directly to the bank. And where did he say he was taking them, Tank? I don't remember. I think he said he was taking them to some other group, right? One of the groups?
Yeah, well, I believe initially he had told us that he was going to travel, and he had to travel quite a few hours to get to his destination. Yeah.
The bank, yes.
Right. And then instead he just kind of made a phone call to see what he could do. And then from my understanding, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he was discouraged from doing that by someone. And not necessarily a banker, by the way. I just think it was, someone
in the group.
Yeah, Well, yeah, I'm not sure, but it was something like that. So that's what happened there, and that's why and what was happening is I believe he was trying to facilitate. They said that there would be a problem to make those funds liquid with that code, and so he was going to facilitate a Zim exchange for Zim he had in his possession. And
now this wasn't the bank that told him there would be a problem. It was somebody in the core group that told him there would be a problem, and that he could only exchange his Zim. And they were trying to make some arrangement that nobody talked to me about. So I canceled it.
Right.
I had to.
Okay. Yep. I get it. So, there's some things there that could have been lost in translation. So if those details are not exactly right, it's really irrelevant, because when it comes down to it, I understand you're keeping the money safe so it doesn't fall in the wrong hands. Okay, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know those people, and I know what it takes to use a code. I've used it. The last time I transferred funds was Tuesday of last week. It wasn't a large amount. It was for a project. It was in another country, but they work. Every time I issue a code, it works. It works just fine. So I know what it takes to use a code. I know where you have to go. I know the systems that you have to use. And I don't know those people in those core groups at all. So if you're gonna take sensitive information and give it to whoever you feel like, it doesn't work that way. You have to, I'm not trying to tell people what to do, but I know the procedures of the trust, and I know what it takes at a bank to make it work. I have experience doing this. So I just needed him to follow the instructions, and obviously that's not what he wanted to do. So.
Right.
Wow.
Kim, just while you're there, did you want to kind of talk about some of, I understand if you don't, but do you want to talk about some of the issues when you have transferred money for projects and things like that that have come up, like other claims to the accounts, things like that?
In the past, there were over 600 trustees worldwide. It took 2 trustees and the final key holder to actually release funds. That's how it worked until 2007, 2008, when they began to turn the trust off. And the trust still made limited transactions between then and 2012, such as allocations for governments and those types of things. Pretty much by 2012, that all stopped, and the only one pulling funds was me. And so over the course of a couple of years, and in coordination with the people at the top, the 3, the father and the 2 sons at the top, I was actually transferring funds for probably another 2 years. And every single time I would transfer funds, they would say, oh, we have to pull it back. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, the banks won't release it. And they kept making up stories. So I started realizing something is wrong. And pretty much what I found out is that every single time I transferred funds, there was a total of about $980 billion over a period of a couple of years that got transferred out of the system using my codes. And it all went to all the wrong people. It went to fund the order. And I didn't know that. So I finally found out for sure in 2015, that's what was happening. Ever since that point, since I completely separated from the other group, and then the three people now, well, two of them have passed away. One is no longer active. And that happened in August of 2016. The only issue that I've had now in transferring funds and into any of the larger banks, and especially into the government, is everyone from the 13 families is blocking it. So that would be all your dragon families, your Rothschilds, and all of their loyalists. They want to maintain power over the government and maintain power over the UN and the World Bank and all of these organizations for as long as possible. And that's how I know that the elders don't have codes, because I'm not giving them any codes, so we're kind of in a Mexican standoff.
All right. You mentioned there's older codes which are no longer active, correct? But the new codes that are being generated fresh are the ones that you have, correct?
Yeah. Codes were issued to people on the family level for a task specific, job specific, and amount specific, and they would hold these codes until the job was done. And then they would get new codes for a new job. So it wasn't like they had a free-for-all. They ever had access to unlimited funds. It was never the case. The key holder at the top always had the final say as to whether or not they were going to release any funds to any of the family members. And this went on for ever since the global electronic system went live, which was between 1978 and 1984. The transition was pretty much complete, where the whole backside of the financial system was contained within one system, fully under control, under one master key.
So that's as of 2008, and that would be in line with the market crash. Got it. Yeah,
the market at the time the main key holder. See, the system contains a diagnostic information too. So it actually pulls information from all of the markets and all of the central banks. And the CDO and the derivative markets were so out of control, he knew that his control system, because he was very much a dictator, his control system would not be self-sustainable if they continued to issue derivatives into the market. So he turned it off for his own selfish reasons, although he'll claim that, the families are greedy, used to use lots of terms that I won't say on the phone, but, he's the one that ultimately cut it off.
Right. Jade, you go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I want to say thank you for doing this call. We really appreciate all info that you're providing. So this is my question. How can we make this whole process with you work for humanity without jeopardizing the RB process at its current position?
And this is something that I've been working on, through Tank, some of his associates. We've been reaching out to some of the governments. We do have a methodology whereby we're releasing amounts of every currency simultaneously throughout the world, along with an asset base that corresponds to that currency. So it's going to take a lot of cooperation between all of the governments to make that happen. And that's something that was basically just, I had presented it probably in November, and a lot of the governments were gearing up for that process. We had talks with a number of the larger countries. You got 3 main superpowers, maybe 4 on the planet, and the talks were going pretty well with a couple of them. We've had a lot of problems here in the U.S. in getting the U.S. on board. This administration is working diligently, along with, of course, a lot of the personnel, military personnel, agency personnel, to allow them to move forward. So every time you're promised funding, the governments are promised funding also. Some countries like, China government doesn't need money. They have plenty. They don't really need assets, and that's not because of the elders, that's because of them. The elders haven't made a contribution to the Chinese government since before 2010. So probably about the last time that they made any kind of contribution. I know that here the last allocation of USD that was issued by the Reserve against the asset base that was in the Reserve, which belonged to the trust, was in about 2009. So they've been recirculating funds, and they've actually been taking funds from the government also has these mirrors. If you think it's just the people waiting to be liquid with the RV, but that's not the case. The government has mirrors also, and there are other governments that have mirrors that are being promised funds all over the world. There are many governments that are not as large and as strong as the United States that receive constant threats. If they take their dividends out of the trust, then they're going to cut them off from the financial system. They'll be pushed out of the United Nations, and they won't have any access to the World Trade Organization anymore, and their country will be decimated. And I've heard it all, and that's coming from people claiming to be working for the IMF, people claiming to be working for the World Bank and all of these organizations. So the governments kind of take it seriously unless they get to a point where they absolutely need something to happen. And there are countries that are doing that, and we're doing it very quietly and below the radar so that it doesn't, they don't have that kind of effect. But here, there's a lot of good people in this country that are doing a phenomenal job at trying to remove the deep state's control over the government. And that's what you're seeing even coming out in the news now. And there's so many people that do a lot of work that doesn't come out in the news. And you'd be surprised at the things that you would hear and see. But I think that there's progress being made, and I think, for all the things, presidents are just men. They get up every morning and they kiss their wife and kids goodbye, and they go to work, right? So, they're not Superman. They don't walk on water, and they don't part it, and all those things. So you got to give them an opportunity to do the best that they can as fast as they can with what they have to work with.
Awesome. Okay, so we're basically on the cut. We're in the midst of a liquidity crisis right now. The government is shut down, and at the end of the day, now that's, in a sense, that affects everyone on some level very, very quickly. And you have the ability to change that. And in reality, you have a responsibility to ensure that humanity is actually liberated, not just it's not as simple as just releasing the money and expecting it to be in people's accounts. Basically, you can release the money, and as we talked about yesterday, it can just evaporate, right? You talked about that happening to you. So Is that okay?
So, we have a very real cyber problem. That's one aspect of things. if they can manage to siphon budgetary funds out of the Pentagon, then I'm sure they can manage to take funds out of John Q. Customer at Bank of America.
Right.
And they use old agreements that have expired to throw their weight around to say they have the right to do it. Based on some of these things you see on the internet, like you see the SQV agreements, you see the Crown agreements, everybody talks about the Queen, the Committee of 300. They all claim that they have the right over the United States, and that is not true anymore. It hasn't been true for a number of years, but they did get an extension from the people that sat in my chair before for 5 years, which expired on the 23rd of December 2012. And I'm not renewing anything, and there's nobody else here to renew anything anymore. So, this is new. It's not old, I know everybody wants this to happen overnight, and I'd love to have it happen overnight too. I mean, this is not a fun job, but we're working through 1,000 years of history with these groups, generation after generation, and a lot of people are trying, and they're also trying too. Make no mistake that we push, and we're pushing, and they're pulling. So, anything anybody can do to help, that would be great. And that's what I'm saying. It's like everybody's always yelling at me, do this, do that, but, it's not as easy as you think. Virtually every large bank in this country is owned by the trust. But it's the trust's former trustees, like Rockefeller, Rothschild, and all of these things that, A, didn't do their job, B, never got the projects done they were supposed to get done, and C, still are in control of the human beings that work at the higher levels in these banks for whatever reason. It's usually out of fear and greed of some sort. But, there's no liquidity in the country anymore. And that was, they told me that 4 years ago that that's what they were going to try to do. And they were going to, yeah. And I've been fighting against it ever since.
So they told you that they would never allow you to bring these funds into the United States, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
it wasn't until Trump came into office that we started to actually get some traction.
Right. So now we're starting to get some traction, and the goal is to essentially run the economy, bankrupt the economy of the United States, and then buy it back for pennies on the dollar.
That's exactly what they told me.
Okay. So now we've
it's also part of the reason why I kind of think that they keep putting this distribution process. So irrespective of it's through currencies or through projects or however it actually reaches the people, because they're promising the government tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to release the funds, just like they are you.
Right.
And so half of the government that believes in the RV believes that they're actually going to fund. Remember, half of the government, their entire career life, has always gotten money through the likes of these people. And it's just not coming. They don't have it. So, everybody's being told the same thing. During the time of the election, Hillary signed a ton of agreements with the Chinese elders, promising to give them all the in-ground reserves of the United States when she became president.
Right.
No,
right.
She's not. She wasn't even in a government position at the time. Of course, she had no authority to do that. And when she didn't get elected, everything went haywire.
Right.
Did they try to register all of the gold registered under the BLM to the Shanghai Exchange under the Chinese elders? Yes, they did. Why? Because the Chinese elders don't have any assets. Did they try to do that against 43 African nations? Yes, they did. Was it blocked? Yes, it was. They tried to use the Paris Treaty, the new Paris Treaty, to legally, claim their right.
And then this speaks to the reason why the Chinese elders have paid the kind of military payroll over the past couple of years, right?
Well, let me tell you what actually happened. If you want to know about the payroll, okay?
Yeah.
What actually happened here is that, do they have no money? No, they have money. They live just like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds do. They did not take a vow of poverty. That is a lie. But about a year and a half ago, they actually bought all of the, not all, but a substantial portion of all of the U.S. military's equipment using an allocation of the government, which was slated for the military of China. Then they leased it back to the Pentagon. So they didn't do anybody any favors. They just made a purchase at pennies on the dollar, nonetheless, and then leased them back their own equipment.
Right. Okay.
So are they actually paying a payroll? Not really. We just gave a whole bunch of equipment to another government to reverse engineer. So congratulations. That was a great idea. I don't know who thought of that one.
All right. Callie, you can go ahead.
Okay, so another question was, what exactly are you waiting on to activate everything? And I think you touched on that already, but just to say.
Well, we need government cooperation, not only here in the United States, but all over the world to make that happen in large amounts. We can do smaller amounts country by country. And what I mean by smaller amount, it's still very substantial. We do have a methodology in place that works country by country, and we also have a methodology that works for larger amounts if there's global cooperation. Here in the States, again, where they're giving the government and the Pentagon, the military, everywhere from the head of state to the Treasury Department to the Reserve. They're playing the tomorrow game with the whole government, just like they're playing the tomorrow game with all of you. There's a big cultural difference between the United States and China. I have had talks with the Chinese government. They do not believe that these elders can perform anymore. They pretty much severed cooperation with them a couple of weeks back, probably about a month ago, and they're talking about their own projects and their own allocations and their own funding now. They know that they don't have the access that they say they do. It's just that the whole government here collectively as a group needs to figure that out. You're always going to have your deep state implants in the government, right? But if we could get the majority of the Pentagon cooperating with the majority of the agencies and the majority of the, administration, then absolutely we can start right now.
Okay, well, yeah, and that brings me to the next question, which was basically, in your opinion, how close do you feel we are to actually be able to do our exchanges?
Well, the government has verified funds. Most recently, for the first time, I think, ever since I've been trying to do anything, about a week and a half ago, Tank, that the Pentagon actually verified. Now, they've all known that the funds are there since Trump came into office. But what they didn't know was whether or not I can actually issue an active code that actually works. And it's been about a week and a half since they figured that out. And that was actually because of Tank. So it's Tuesday. They've probably well figured out now that I can actually transfer funds. So, and that the codes do work. About 2 hours ago, I had a long conversation with someone that works closely with our head of state about using the Presidential Emergency Liquidity Fund. You know, that was just a few hours ago. So, you know, we are making progress. Things are going well. I'm hoping that if they decide to use the Emergency Liquidity Fund, there's more than enough there to keep the government running for a little while, that will open up the doors to some of the private banks here in the country for all of you. And then we can start making transfers as far as liquidity into the banking system. Because most of the majors, I said, are, you know, realistically, if it wasn't for the mirrors, like the funds you can see but you can't touch, all of the banks would be pretty much at negative liquidity at this point in time. They've been very successful at doing what they said they were going to do, which was trying to crash the country. And no matter how hard I've tried and how hard I push, you know, everybody wants to believe the tomorrow game with hundreds of quadrillions of dollars on that everybody can see, but nobody can spend and buy their children dinner with. So I am trying.
Kim, if you're comfortable talking about this, I don't, you know, it's okay if you're not, but could you talk about how they've used that tool on kind of prominent figures to kind of starve them out of different positions and manipulate them?
Are you referring to government figures, or?
Well, no, particularly the individual that you talked about from the news channel. It's okay if you don't want. I wasn't sure if you're comfortable talking about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. From the new what?
Oh, from the news, from the.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah.
You know, they make a lot of promises of positions, new positions, more powerful positions. We will destroy your country. We will destroy your bank. We will expose that you were at this party doing this with these people. You know, all kinds of things. You know, they're coming after Trump every day, all day, for things that he may or may not have ever done. You know, he's a global businessman. Of course he did business in Russia. It's one of the largest economies on planet Earth right now. You know, China, Brazil, I mean, of course he did. You know, he built resorts all over the world. Nobody talks about the fact that there's one in Mexico or there's one in, you know, Colombia, you know, but everybody wants to talk about the fact that there was one in Russia. Well, you know, it's just a manipulation tactic. What they're doing to the United States is something, I call it like a cookie cutter process, because they've done it in Sudan, they've done it in Zimbabwe, they've done it in Malaysia, they've done it in the former USSR, they've done it in a lot of different countries over the years, and it's always worked. And it worked because they had the money to come in as the savior. They had access, they had codes, they had access to the funds to come in and say, oh, you know, we're now, you know, we're going to fund you, and now we own you. And that no longer works. Whether it be the Chinese version of the families, or the British version of the families, or the Middle Eastern version of the families, or you know, you see what's going on in Saudi Arabia, you know, and they're hitting their factions, you know, and they're all going to jail, and they're all being forced to pay money. You know, Mr. Talwheel there, you see him in the news. He's the one that's supposedly in jail at the Ritz-Carlton or something, being forced to being paid $6 billion.
Yes.
He used to run Saudi Arabia's main oil company called Aramco. And Aramco signed over to the Chinese elders $3 trillion worth of oil reserves about 3 or 4 years ago, and they never got paid. So they too have the gentleman there also holds dinar, and he's waiting for his trillions of dollars for doing that favor for them. So, you know, this RV process has become so convoluted by these groups that, you know, there is a way to fix it. Jared, and that's why Jared and I spoke for 4 hours on the phone. You know, my main concern is not these billionaires that are far from starving, needing a leg up in their hundreds of trillions of dollars in dinar. We don't care about those people, meaning not that we don't care about them as humans, but we're not interested in participating in that type of wealth. We're more interested in all of you that have, you know, a few $1 million or $100 million or $50 million, and you have a good, solid project that is going to help people, or you're going to build infrastructure. You know, you're going to make a business for yourself and for others, and you're going to employ people, and you're going to give people jobs, good paying jobs. You're going to help families. You're going to give people a leg up. You're going to make that change. You know, that doesn't take trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars is only for people who want to try to buy third world countries or something. You know, it doesn't take as much as everybody thinks to make that change. You know, of course, we need help with distribution. We need help with people that are willing to take on that responsibility of reviewing projects and making sure that the projects are sound. We do have some of those people on staff now. We're always looking for more good people to do these types of things, and that's important. But we've got to get through I guess you would say, the less savory part of this now, and that's what we're trying to work on. You know, I'm working on it myself with all my contacts. Tank's also been working on it. Tank's associates have been working on it. You know, we've got to support our current people that are in the government that are willing, that display that willingness to make that change, to, like, you know, Trump says, drain the swamp, to clean these people out of the government so that the government can be what the government was always supposed to be, which was, you know, a government by the people for the people. So, you know, they need support of the people that can actually help. You know, if anybody from the government is listening, any of the military folks are listening, any of these people, you know, these people need your support. You're the muscle. They've got the brains, but you're the muscle, and they display a willingness. But how do we protect them from being attacked in the media, losing their jobs, them attacking their family? They end up with a heart attack. We've seen that a number of times in the news recently in the last year or so. You know, how do we protect these people so we can make this transition? You know, we're always, you know, I'm open for suggestions. I'll do anything that doesn't hurt anybody in the process. You know, we just need help. We need good minds. We need people who can think. And if we want this to move faster, that, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, for what that's worth, that's what we need. And, you know, I mean, of course, Tank, you're more than welcome to make suggestions. Jared made some suggestions, great suggestions on our call. So we're going to work together now to try to help move this forward with all his people and with our people, and see if we can help.
Yeah, I will say this. You know, on this call, I'm sure there's people who are fans and people who are critics of me personally. But I will say this. You know, one of the reasons why we have been so aggressive in filing this lawsuit, and in particularly setting up the most, you know, effective dead man's trigger we could, was never because we wanted to be in litigation against a perennial force that controls the banks and the law and everything else. the idea was that we would set something up so that as people filed for the lawsuit and we found a pathway in that was, rock solid, which we have now as far as having so much evidence, just a mountain of evidence that we could use to demonstrate, conspiracy to defraud the American people, to demonstrate what Kim is actually the one who told me this, that it's illegal for them to show funds in your account and then hold those funds from you without a good reason, and also giving you 30 days notice, and a bunch of other things too that we have in there that we can prove. And we set that up with the hopes that a unified voice with us together, standing together, really saying like, look, we're not going to accept this anymore, that we could push to help get this done. But more importantly, it acts as a safety feature on some level, right, that we have it set up for the dead man's trigger that if anyone's funds are frozen, or if anyone's funds are taken, for that matter, and if anyone gets hurt who is filed on the lawsuit, that on some level, what it does is it automatically activates the dead man's trigger. Now, we have not issued all the packets of evidence. We have it set up so right now media organizations that we have that will literally allow this to go worldwide very fast, because we're filing the biggest lawsuit in history, and also we're doing it under the RICO law, which makes it triple damages, and the RICO law actually settles a lot faster, but there's no intent to hurt our government, certainly, and certainly not even the banks or the employees. The whole idea is to protect people. Now, are they responsive to that? They seem relatively fearless. I'm banking on some level they don't want that exposed. That's one thing. And then, we have a bunch of other things in place that I think are important to reverse govern, right? You have the Declaration of Independence, and when the Declaration of Independence gets signed, it's a short time after that you have all that work, all that poetic language just fall by the wayside. It reminds me of a company that has a great mission statement, and then you talk to them 20 years after they launched the company, and none of them even know what the mission statement is. And all they had to do was take away, the freedom of the press, in a sense, right? And once they took away the freedom of the press, there was no one really there to hold the government accountable to live up to those standards talked about in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. So we do have very strategic goals to bring back, the free press after this, and that's part of the reason why we want to make sure we're funded. I certainly consider that a humanitarian project on levels, right? And then we also have some other things in place to ensure that once we are liberated, that we remain liberated. Now, that's just my core team coming up with things. So I just want to put this out there to everyone, like Kim just said, that I think, personally, this new age, to ensure we're not living in fear, to ensure that we are keeping humanity at the forefront of being liberated and leading their own planet for the first time, it's essential to have those things. And if anybody has really amazing ideas they want to share and they want to, get to somebody above me, I am not vain about this. If you don't even want me to be part of it, you just want to get it to somebody more important than me, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll get you to someone more important. I'm not under any delusion that I'm the end all and be all of this. So I just want to throw that in there, Kim, to support what you're saying, because I do think that's important.
Well, it is, and your dead man's trigger was a brilliant idea. The trust also holds a lot of information that used to flow through it from these family members in orders that would go out to various governments around the world. It's a large file, and the clearance level of the trust is very, very high, so it's way over, majestic level. So I call it the fulcrum because I watched that show, The Blacklist. I like that show. So, but he mentioned the fulcrum that contains all the information. Well, it's very true. It does exist, and And it's part of the reason why no one wants to do anything to me, because if anything happens to me, all that information will go out everywhere, to every country that has ever been affected by what it is they've done, which is virtually every land mass on planet Earth since the days of kingdoms. We know what they've done. I know what they've done.
That's heavy.
You know, they might have the media, they might have mainstream media, but even that's becoming questionable. And there are many other countries now that are coming out with English-speaking news channels. Russia has one. There's Al Jazeera. China has one. You know, it's no longer just CNN and BBC for global news anymore. So, you know, and this information is getting out there through some of these alternative news sources. And you'll see a different side of things if you start looking at the news from a global perspective, other than just waiting for something to be on CNN. So the world is changing, you know, but change takes time. You know, they didn't get to the position that they were at where they're controlling all of these things, you know, overnight. You know, it took thousands of years of planning by a master, you know, strategic person that, you know, had access to technologies that, you know, haven't even been close to being released into the public yet. So, you know, there's a lot of conspiracies about, you know, different accesses to information, you know, Area 51, all of these different things. Well, you know, these people hoard it all for their own selves. So, of course, they have one up on, you know, all of the rest of humanity, and they use it, or they used to. You know, until it's only been since August of 2016. So, you know, I think humanity's doing pretty well right now, considering that it's only been a year and a half. And some of the extensions that they gave didn't even expire until the end of last year, the 23rd of December. So, you know, everybody knows it. All the countries know it. You know, that their in-ground resources now belong back to them. It's not to the other group anymore, no matter how much they try to enforce it. But that is the reality of it. You know, but the threat is real. The fear is real. You know, that someone's going to come knocking on their door and threaten their family. It does happen. I had that happen around the end of November to a country.
And that happens at the banking level as well, right? So a lot of these bankers who are scared to cooperate, in a sense, right, to allow these funds to come in to the country, it's in part because they're under duress. There's a fear that is very real that has been levied against them or their family, and so it's possible at least that could be the reason why they don't want to cooperate for that. Is that right?
Yes, that's happened. Mm-hmm. You know,
so,
they threatened to put them in the news for things they never even did. You know,
right.
All these news stories that come out about this politician having done this and that politician having done that. You know, I'd say, you know, realistically, part of the time did those things actually happen? You know, I would say probably some of the time it did, and some of the time it didn't.
Right.
You know, and we are just human, right? We all do make mistakes.
Sure.
You know, it's not that, you know, the average everyday people, you know, sometimes people cheat on their wives, sometimes people cheat on their husbands, sometimes people make mistakes. And, you know, we are all human. So,
yeah.
But they do report a lot of things that didn't happen just for people that don't agree with the system they've put in place.
Right. And with that in mind, this is, I think you said it, but I think it's worth repeating, particularly for any of our, you know, I was asked this question today, like, you know, what are you going to do? Have, you know, somebody there with a gun to somebody's head while you make the transfer? To which my answer was yes, if need be, and maybe that's a bit extreme. But I think to your point that certainly we need to make sure.
We need to do it better this time. You know, that's what they did. They used to hold guns to people's heads. They would hold their family hostage. They would hurt their families. They would do all of these things. And that's the system that they created. They created a system that was based on fear and greed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you no longer have greed, meaning you can't feed the machine anymore, they may have millions of dollars and they're living in mansions and they're not hurting, but they don't have trillions of dollars to fund countries and banks anymore. So, when you don't have greed to feed the system, then you resort to fear.
Right.
And so the willingness of the people that work for them still is the issue. Trust me when I tell you, these wrinkly old guys are not going, Chinese or American or otherwise, are not going to put a gun to anybody's head. They would never get their hands dirty in that manner. There's always a guy or a lady that is doing it. So the willingness of these people to participate in that system has to stop. Because if you don't have legs to run, then they're certainly not going to get out of their comfy little chair in their mansion and go do this. They'll pick up the phone and make a phone call and make a threat. And the threats were always real, in the past. How do you know that gun's not loaded, right?
Right.
So more so than that, it's not so much putting a gun to somebody's head. It's actually the opposite. It's like, why don't you offer them protection? We have enough military people that are highly trained on the phone. We have enough security companies that listen, private security companies. We have enough people in the government, offer these people protection. That's what I would say would be better, a better option. If anybody else has any other thoughts, then, feel free. But they need the protection.
I think that's a great idea, and I can tell you that I did talk to people in the military today, and it did seem they were very open to that suggestion, because obviously, we all got to kind of come together. What I love about the military is they are people. They are regular people, and they're making decisions about other people's lives every single day, and they certainly consider themselves protectors, as do most of us consider them protectors. So it's not even a stretch for them to offer that protection once we kind of identify the right source, which hopefully they have. Sid, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. I just have a couple for you, Tim. Thank you for being on the phone with us tonight and answering all these questions. So I just don't want to take up too much of your time. We're hearing all this convoluted information. This community just, we get whatever we get, and we have to discern. And, we're hearing about the bloodlines, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and we're being told that they're being rounded up. Now, I don't know if you can talk about any of this stuff. Is that true? I mean, is there evidence to include them?
Well, to answer your question, yes.
Great.
And you've also got to realize that, governments, plural, have to actually catch these people in the act of doing something in order for them to be, how do you say it?
Tried or put to task
evidence.
or to be. Yeah, they have to have a reason. You can't just say, well, your last name is so-and-so, and so therefore you're part of this, right?
Right.
So it, what do they say, that story about the scorpion and the frog, you got to wait for the scorpion to sting,
Right.
That's part of it. And then you have other countries that are limiting their capacity and access to doing business in those countries. But they have different types of government structures. And remember, the U.S. has been the power center and was designed to be the power center for these groups. As agreed, it went from UK after World War II, and then everybody moved to America. So even whether you were the Asian group or you were the Russian group or you were the German group or you were the British group or the Middle Eastern group, you were based in America. So even if you didn't live here, your power base, your asset contributions, your, all the things that they did all filtered through America. And that is why it's so difficult in this country to remove them from this country. And I think, everything was always done as a super secret sauce, right? There was always a guy who reported to a guy who reported to a guy. And if you know anything about war strategy, because they did run very much like a military order, that's why Tank posted what's called a Sun Tzu wheel. Everybody's heard of the Sun Tzu Art of War. If you haven't, look it up on the internet. It's on there.
I was just going to say the Art of War.
And so what a Sun Tzu wheel does is you have your center people, then you have your people around those people, and then you have the people around those people. And when everybody gave orders, then it was always done by a code name. So it wasn't like a guy. So an order would come down from one group to another group to another group to another group, and it wasn't always the same person giving the order, and it was always done by a code name. So, like, for example, one of the code names that they used to use was called the Devil's Wife. The Devil's Wife could be a man or could be a woman. It didn't matter who it was. And so you never know who is the guy. Where's the lady? Where's the guy? Where's the person responsible for this, making this order? And so they did everything so secretively, and they used all of these old war tactics that nobody really knows who all these people really are. Those are the obvious ones that are just flaunting it everywhere. Like they play good cop, bad cop, but it's the left hand versus the right hand of the same body. Right. So they started making that transition. In 1975, they all agreed that they were going to, in 2012, that they were going to transfer the power center from the United States to China. That was agreed in 1975. So in 1975, they formulated the plan on how they were going to crash the United States, just like they crashed the UK. The UK went into a massive depression for over 10 years after World War II. They had the same intention to employ the same tactic in the United States, which is what we're seeing going on right now. So, of course, the Rothschilds and the Hillary Clintons and the Bushes and all these people are the bad guys. And then the Chinese elders, purportedly, are the good guys. They're the benevolent ones. They're so spiritual and wonderful. And that branding started coming out to you, on the level that you work on years ago, over 10, 15 years ago, because they had already planned this transition, 30, 40 years before that. So they're branding these people as the good guys and the other guys as the bad guys, but it's the right and the left hand of the same body.
Amazing.
all of these families bought places in Macau years ago, back in 2005, 2006. All of them planned on moving over there. And thus far, because of people like, you call them the Alliance, the White Hats, all of these people, they are doing their job. The media is changing. There's no longer just CNN. There's no longer just, the alternative media, is out there. There's all kinds of people reporting all kinds of things. But again, they've even branded these people as the benevolent ones, even in the alternative media. And they got to keep the lie going because this was the plan. They don't know how to make a plan B because their boss is gone. He was the brains of every operation. He wrote the plan. And when he passed away in 2016, they don't know what they're doing anymore. That's why everybody's running around trying to say who done it, who do we blame, where do we go, because he's not there anymore.
Wow. Well, we really appreciate you clearing that up because the information we get is, like we said, very convoluted, and now we know where we stand and everything as far as what we're doing right now. I understand that we're waiting for global cooperation, and Tank and yourself and Jared Rand and your associates are doing things behind the scenes, and we really appreciate that. But I guess what the people really want to know is, what can we do to help?
Well, we all are starting to do that now. So,
okay, great.
Tank's been working with his people in the military, his people in the Treasury. He's getting the word out on his side of it. Everybody's starting to have an understanding that I'm not the enemy, that yes, I have some codes, but, I'm one person, right? I'm not a million people like you. And we need everybody's cooperation to understand that we got to get through to these banks. These bankers do need liquidity. They know it. But they keep getting, promised tomorrow you'll get it. These people in the government, the Pentagon needs money. The government needs money. And you can't keep kicking the can. And they've told me that they were going to kick the can. I mean, I've been fighting, I didn't start to find out a lot of these truths until, 2014, 2013. And the main only reason why they even told me little bits and pieces is because I learned to recognize the fact that in every lie that they told, there's 1% truth. So if I could just find the 1% truth in everything that came out of their mouth, I'd start to put the pieces of the puzzle together and find the actual truth. And they wanted me to go along with their plans because they needed me to keep giving codes and releasing money so that they could steal it. So they had to get some level of cooperation from me in a way that I would want to do this, because the system doesn't work. The system has the capacity, okay, we probably have some people on the phone here from the military. We probably have some people on the phone here from agencies. The old lie detector test, you see them in the movies, where they hook it up and they put these, little pads on the body, and then they ask all kinds of questions, and they get the baseline, and then when the lines go way up and down, that's old technology now. Now if you're called for questioning, whether it's into an FBI office or a CIA office or a military intelligence office, and now they have this new technology that reads brainwaves. So they tell if you're lying, it's a much harder system to cheat. So the system, the back system, also has this type of technology. It can tell if I'm under distress, right? It can tell if I'm issuing a code because someone's got a gun to my head, and the system will just cease to function. And they know it. That's the only reason why everybody leaves me alone for the most part, except for the people that don't understand. I've had my fair share of problems. Some I've shared, with Tank about, people trying to do things. And I've been poisoned, I've been shot at, all that stuff happened. And, I've had a bunch of people try to snatch and grab me and pick me up and take me to their, respective places where they thought they were going to lock me in there and just have me issue codes, and keep me, so, I've had all those issues. I have a lot of good people that protect me and try to, do the best you can. No security is 100%, but everybody, does a really great job. I'm still here. I'm still walking around, and, but they can't figure out how to get my cooperation to only give them codes. So they keep blocking all the information from getting to the governments, all the information from getting to the military for sure, and all of the information from getting to the people. And so, by, the end of last year, I just decided, okay, well, I'm just going to get all the information out there. I'm just going to tell everybody everything that, that doesn't obviously involve classified information from governments that they give me. But I'm going to get all the other information out there, because if everybody knows and everybody understands what's happening to their own personal lives because of what these people are doing, then maybe that information is no longer the secret sauce. Maybe it'll start getting through to the government, and maybe it'll start getting through to some of these people who can actually protect our country and not let this crash happen. they're planning on crashing this country. They were hoping to be done by the end of 2012, but for sure, they told everybody at the last UN session, because our administration here and a number of other countries that I have communication with were all talking about taking the funding from the trust, and that it was available for development and infrastructure and all of these things. And Rothschild popped into the UN and told everybody, every head of state, that if you take these funds, then we are going to release biological weapons. If we are not in full control of this planet by this time next year, we are going to basically destroy the world.
Well, thank you so much for answering those questions. Now we actually know who to trust. Thank you.
So it's, to say what everybody can do, I'm giving you what is needed, what I think is needed. We're always looking for new ideas, new strategies. How do you think that we could do this faster, better? We're more than, we want the people to participate. We want, there's that old story about the truck that got stuck underneath the bridge, and the 5-year-old comes along and says, well, just let the air out of the tires. You never know where the best strategy is going to come from. And we want the input. I'm talking to you, I'm talking to Tank, I'm talking to anybody else who's listening. We want your input on what we can do together to help move this forward faster.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll get started.
Thank you.
All right, Kim. We're going to end it right there. I think that was a ton of content, and really, I can't thank you enough. Just absolutely amazing where we're at. And we will have the recording for this call that will be out. I wanted to keep it a reasonable length so that people will listen. I would recommend sending the call out to everyone you know. And I will say this. If you are listening to what is being said, I want to remind people this. Somebody put this thing out, this bold statement that the person who has the codes is a man, and this is so Kim is a fraud. Well, if that man has the codes, Kim has put out the challenge. I just want to put it out there for her again because I think it's awesome. She said, if that's true, both of you can meet at the same place. She will produce a code. He can produce a code, and whichever one brings out money is the winner. Okay? Even the codes that people, the popular names that we know, even those codes, they're waiting for those codes to come from places that's still the same place, still the same person on the phone right now, for the record. And Kim, you got anything else you want to say before we jump off?
Well, in that context, I just wanted to briefly say that, there was a bit of intel that was put out by one of the intel providers that said that the codes were put out to Citibank and nothing happened. Well, I sent Tank a copy of an email I had sent to a gentleman in Hong Kong who's not Asian, he's American, and we had made a contract for a reclamation project, a remediation project, which is environmental cleanup, and which he was going to receive what's called soft costs, which is the initial part of the project of $5 million. And so once I sent that email out, the next day the transaction wasn't even supposed to happen at Citibank. So Citibank in Hong Kong tried using that code repeatedly, and then they moved over to HSBC in Hong Kong repeatedly, trying to use it for hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's the code was a $5 million code. It doesn't work that way. So I'm getting all these notifications. Finally, I canceled the code. But was a code issued on a Citibank off-ledger account? Yes. Did it not work? Yes. Why? Because it was not issued for that purpose. It was a cleanup project for a bay in China. It had nothing to do with the RV or issuing derivatives or changing M1 is actual cash in hand, M4 is a derivative. When they said that we're going to make the M4 into M1, that's exactly what they were talking about. They wanted to issue more derivatives in the market against oil contracts in Iraq, in Sudan, in Saudi Arabia, and all these other countries. So I just wanted to let you know that that's what happens to me. I go to try to do a project. I have to do it the right way, and somehow it turns into, a whole other thing that was never part of it. We want to return to an asset-backed system. We want to return to an asset-based trading system. We do not need derivatives against commodities futures. We just don't. We don't. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. And for everyone listening, thank you very much for your time on a Saturday night. I really appreciate all of you. I am very much looking forward to any strategic plans that any of you have that will help us move forward faster. I appreciate your time and even thinking through it. And I would appreciate you getting in touch with Tank so that we can hopefully start to implement some of these plans. Please make sure that you put your contact information in there so that if we have any questions or we need to talk through some of it, that we have a way to contact you. And again, Tank, thank you very much for having this call. I really appreciate it.
Same thing. I appreciate you. Hey, guys, one other thing, too, just in case, because I'm fielding a lot of calls, right? And I do feel responsible to you and to everyone, and particularly to Kim, to help her do her job the best she can. I do have a very reasonable understanding of what she needs, so I know what she's looking for when you contact me. Please, when you contact me, I am taking, literally at least 300 calls a day. When you contact me, I will assume that you're calling me because you have a qualified history. So I don't always have time to sit and hear about why you're qualified. And I was a little curt with a gentleman the other day, and he was definitely qualified, but he didn't have a plan. When you call, please have a plan in mind. All of you anybody on here who has an idea, you should have a much better idea now of how you can help. So please call and be efficient. We're trying to do everything we can to support, the Alliance and Kim and all of humanity to liberate ourselves, right? And this is definitely it's definitely a team effort. And that is definitely one way you can help. And I'll tell you what else. Anybody on this call who is from the banking, institution or the government and all of you, we are, we support you, right? We stand with you guys. You're people too. And we're just looking for everyone to really take a stand together for humanity. It's not just, pretty talk. This is a way we can do this. So thank you, Gangster Fairies, for helping out today.
No problem.
You're always appreciated. And
Tank, if it helps you out any, we can do perhaps maybe your group, your admins, maybe all of the people listening on the phone, they can kind of all put together a bunch of questions, that they might have, and then we can do another call in a week or something like that. Does that help you any?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's kind of where we got these questions, and then I expect we'll get even better questions when people have more information. So, awesome sauce. Yep. So we'll schedule another call for next week, and everybody have a great night and enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Thanks again, Kim.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. It was great.